Morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Happy to have you with us. I am beginning a little bit of a spring break week this week. We've got some really fun stuff planned for you. Next couple of days, I've put together some shows, kind of getting you ready for G-Day and where things stand with Georgia football as the spring practice rolls on. Also, by the end of the week, we're going to have great live stuff for you. Kaylee Manziel going to be a big part of that. Jeff Sintel, Connor Riley, perhaps even some special guests. All of that coming up before the end of the week because, you know, there'll be news that's breaking while we are away. So that is to come. For today, though, I think it's important to lay the groundwork that while there is a lot of unanswered questions for Georgia, the overarching opinion of these dogs right now is that they will still be very good in 2025, even in the face of what once again looks like an incredibly difficult schedule. And to begin this new week, to kind of lay the groundwork, you'll remember last week we talked about the over-unders and things like that, sort of establish that as a theme. I think it's important to just kind of give you an idea of what's being said about Georgia right now. In fact, we'll begin with that. Glad to have you with us as the week gets going. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I am not here live today, but we have a great week planned of shows for you. In fact, if you'll remember last week, I invited you to be a part of this, and boy, the submissions we've gotten have been outstanding. We're going to be sharing a lot of these with you over the course of the next couple of days. We were talking about over-unders, and I like theme weeks for whatever reason. This week, you know, kind of getting towards the end of spring practice, pre-G-Day, kind of looking ahead to the 2025 season, seems appropriate to kind of start to be a little bit more specific about our predictions about what Georgia will be for the upcoming season. And so that's why, as a guest over the course of the next couple of days, I'm going to have Mike Griffith on the show. He is going to say some things about Georgia today that not everybody's going to love, but it's perhaps a contrast from people who are hearing what I am saying about Georgia in the next couple of minutes. And then over the course of the next few days, I invited you to weigh in on this. I'm going to weigh in on this too. An over-under for Georgia. I tried to work really hard to make these kind of wedge numbers, sort of splitting the audience on one side or the other. We're going to talk about how many points per game Georgia will average this season, over or under 35.5. How many points per game Georgia will allow this season, over or under 16.5. We're going to talk about Gunnar Stockton's projected touchdown passes. Is it over or under 26.5? Nate Frazier rushing yards. I set that total a little higher. Over or under 809.5 for him this season, and then over or under 3.5 first team All SEC selections for Georgia. Those were the numbers we put together, and over the course of the next few days, we'll hear from you. I'll share some thoughts, and we'll kind of get, as I mentioned, a little bit more specific about where we are on Georgia for this upcoming season. But before we do that in future days, to kind of kick off this week, I do think it's appropriate to give some context about whether or not you are on the more optimistic or less optimistic, trending towards pessimistic side for UGA. And one of the things we have to remind ourselves sometimes is that, you know, we always say we are the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. That means every single day, even when I'm not here live, we're here talking about Georgia football. That means we amplify all the things that are great about Georgia. Perhaps sometimes, though, that also means we magnify Georgia's blemishes. And I think we lose the context that can exist when you just sort of look at things from more of a 10,000-foot view or whatever else. And so for the people who, when they hear me say those numbers, there are some Georgia fans, and we have not shied away from this. We've given platform for this. We haven't tried to, condemn people for their opinion. There are some Georgia fans that are going to take the unders on some of those ambitious totals for UGA, especially offensively, as you know. And the people who will make arguments in favor of that are not necessarily arguing, you know, from kind of a wrong-headed perspective. In fact, as I mentioned, in a moment, you're going to hear Mike Griffith, who's a lot more pessimistic about Georgia right now for the upcoming season than I am. I'm going to allow him to say his piece on that because who's to say that many of you don't agree with what he's saying. But once again, it's important to note as we kind of get more specific about Georgia here this year, the prevailing narrative about Georgia is that the Dogs are expected to still be among the very best teams in college football for this upcoming season. In fact, let me give you an example of this. In light of the theory of and the theme of over-unders and kind of making some projections, we'll do a lot of that for Georgia. This week, we're going to do some of that for the rest of the SEC. But let me begin here with what a writer named Brandon Marcello, writing for CBS Sports, has said about Georgia. FanDuel, one of the big sports books, has its over-under for the upcoming season at 9.5 regular season wins. That means if you want to bet that number, and they put the half there for a reason, you either have to say above that or below that. Over 9.5 wins or under 9.5 wins. And Marcello, writing for CBS, takes the over of 9.5 for Georgia here for the upcoming season. It's also worth noting that when you make a bet in real life, there's actually what you call juice attached to it. When you see a minus number, that means the thing that you're picking is the favorite, which means you have to pay a little more to take the favorite. So in this particular case, the over 9.5 for Georgia is actually juiced to 178. You're paying a pretty big price for Georgia, that 9.5 number. The point of that is to suggest that the odds makers are telling you that 10-2 is a lot more likely outcome for Georgia than 9-3. So keep that in mind when you see that number there. 9.5 may be the number, but 10, a far more likely outcome for Georgia than 9. In fact, that's what Marcello takes. Let me show it to you again. I'll read you Marcello's reasoning on this. He lays out the wins for Georgia. He'll give you home games against Marshall, Austin Peay, also beating Alabama, beating Kentucky, winning at Auburn, beating Ole Miss, beating Florida, at Mississippi State, beating Texas, and then concluding with Charlotte and Georgia Tech. The loss that Brandon gives Georgia is at Tennessee. So he's got Georgia going 11-1 in the regular season. Let me just pause here right now. I do realize that losing at Neyland Stadium, Georgia has dominated Tennessee now for a good number of years. I realize that's a streak that many Georgia fans are proud of, and with good reason. I understand all of that. But if you told me, as a Georgia partisan who wants the best for Georgia, who goes into every season believing the best is possible, but also hoping that it occurs, if you told me right now I could have that record for Georgia out of the regular season, undefeated at home once again, 11-1 overall, even if those Tennessee, folks could have some bragging rights and say, we finally beat Georgia. If you told me, given the schedule that Georgia's about to play, that they could go 11-1 against that schedule, I think you got to take it and you got to run with it. We talked about this a lot going into last season, around this same time, in fact, that the new normal in college football is being okay, not being undefeated. And when you play an SEC schedule like Georgia does, any potential loss is a kind of a painful one because of the bragging rights you give to the team that beat you. But nobody went undefeated last year. The only team to enter the playoff that was undefeated, that's Oregon. They were kicked out of the playoff as quick as they got there. No one was undefeated. I just think, realistically speaking, Georgia is not going to go undefeated this year either. And we say that believing that Georgia could win the national championship. But it's easier to win the national championship than it is to go undefeated in the regular season here right now. So if you gave me that 11-1, I believe it. I have to take it. I'm going to ask. I'll take the graphic one more time because now I want to read what Brandon says. He writes, this is Marcello from CBS Sports. The Bulldogs struggled last season because receivers dropped too many passes. The defensive line, while elite at times, lacked consistency from snap to snap and game to game. He says that should change this fall after Kirby Smart brought in multiple game-changing receivers, led by USC's Zachariah Branch, Texas A&M's Noah Thomas. Brandon Marcello writes that Georgia remains the sport's premier program of recruiting, player retention, and development. Gunnar Stockton is a gamer, and even under heavy pressure, he repeatedly delivered in the college football playoff semifinal game against Notre Dame. Brandon's pick is over 9.5 for Georgia. Now, you may not care about the writer, and you may not care about the fact that he predicted Georgia to go over that total. But the perspective that he shares, kind of coming from sort of a national place, looking outside the bubble of Dog Nation in on us, that does matter. And what Marcello says is the team that's been the premier program when it comes to talent acquisition, when it looks at the issues it had a season ago, he says, I trust Georgia to go out and get, the word he uses, game-changing receivers like Zachariah Branch and Noah Thomas. This week, we're going to talk about both those guys and the impact they could have at Georgia. He mentions the defensive line by name. We talked about that a lot last week. So if you don't care about Brandon Marcello, we can take that down now. If you don't care about Brandon Marcello, CBS Sports, just know this, that the national perspective on Georgia is that this still is viewed to be one of the very best teams in the country. And whatever blemishes Georgia's thought to have with its wide receivers or its offense overall or some of the issues up front with the defensive line or whatever it is that people want to side about that, those issues are not so significant they could stop Georgia from being 11-1, 10-2, above their projected win total. And obviously those are kind of magic numbers. If you're 10-2, if you're 11-1, you could be playing for the SEC championship. You likely will be in the college football playoff, which puts you right there in the mix, in the conversation again for another chance at a national championship. Now, all of that is just sort of from the evaluation of talent and, you know, who's going to do what. Like, all of that's just sort of from the measuring the tangible value that these players bring to the table. Some of them newcomers, other guys who've been here ready to rise up and step up. All of that's just sort of factoring in all of that. But what about what happens when some of this Georgia coaching gets in on these guys? What happens when some of these talented players are then also pushed to be better, to develop more physical and mental toughness? How much more could Georgia also benefit from talented players who either arrive at the program, talented players who are ready to kind of step up for the program, and also having those players now pushed by this Georgia coaching staff to be the very best they can possibly be? In so many ways, that's what this spring practice has been for Georgia. In fact, if you want to go back a few weeks ago now, to when the Georgia spring practice began, with all of these unanswered questions, all of this hope and potential for what Georgia could be, but legitimate concern about some blemishes and issues that should have been 2024, given the landscape of all of that, Kirby Smart laid it out very clearly what it was that he wanted to see from his team during spring practice. And I think we would all agree, if Georgia can show this in the full measure that Kirby Smart's demanding it, then achieving a high win total and being back in the postseason mix, that shouldn't be any problem for UGA. This is Kirby Smart from a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I want to see the fire. I want to see the passion, the energy. I want to see who wants to be a good football player, who really cares about this game. Like, they care more about the game than they do about their NIL revenue stream. Like, if you really, really, really care about the game and you want to be good, it doesn't matter about any kind of money. It matters how I play the game. And more, we're seeing across college football, the purest, the ones that care about the game the most, play the hardest. And usually the team that plays hardest wins. I know everybody thinks it's just whoever's more talented, but there's a whole lot to how hard you play and how much you care about it. So my goal is to find out, how hard do you want to play? How much do you really want to be great? Because if you do, it'll show by how you practice.
So I'm going to play with your emotions here just for a second. When I hear that from Kirby Smart, man, it really fires me up. Makes me want to run through a wall. That's good coach speak, challenging the team. That's just good sounding stuff to me. And I'm hoping that it is too. We've played that clip now a couple of times. I just think it's a really fun one. I think it's a really energizing clip. And as you hear Kirby Smart, who has successfully instilled that fire, passion, energy that he says he wants, this is a coach who has that in the past has successfully instilled that into his team. My question would be to you, for those of you who are a little skeptical, as we kind of roll through our over-unders this week for Georgia in particular, some of y'all are taking unders. And I'm not here to like I said, I'm not going to shame you for not being fully bought in on everything as it relates to Georgia. I'm really not. I have a lot of respect and listen to some very cogent arguments from some Georgia fans who have some legitimate concern right now. There's room for that. There really is. I really believe that. We're going to try to leave some space for that here this week. But for those of you that would say that your skepticism about Georgia right now is pretty high, when you hear Kirby Smart say those types of things there, when you hear Kirby Smart issue that particular challenge there, do you really doubt his ability to do that? Do you really doubt his ability to get that out of the team this year? And when you listen to a national writer, not a Georgia fan, not someone who lives here in Georgia and, is immersed into Dog Nation culture the way that we are each and every day, when a guy like that says, I look at all this, I recognize the issues a year ago, I see the problems there. I got Georgia 11-1. That's what the national writer says. I still got Georgia 11-1. The odds makers, FanDuel, and others say the overwhelmingly likely result is 10-2, more so than 9-3, which puts you in the playoff. For those of you who are pretty skeptical, I don't mean this as like a rhetorical question. I mean this legitimately. Are you going to tell those people, national writer, odds makers, those that expect double-digit regular season wins from Georgia again at least, are you going to tell them that they're wrong? Like when you look at the Georgia schedule, do you really see the concerns that you would say that you have that we don't necessarily disagree with, but the concerns that you say that you have, do you think that actually results in more losses for Georgia this season than it did a year ago? Is that what you're ready to say? Because to be frank and to be clear here to begin our week as we kind of get more deeply into a lot of this stuff, it's not the way that I feel. I can agree with many of you that, boy, this needs to be better. Boy, that wasn't good enough a year ago. And, boy, not quite so sure how you necessarily achieve all of the areas of improvement you think you need to achieve it. I'm right there with you on so much of that. I really am, for those of you who feel that way. But when I look at the schedule, when I look at what Georgia still has, what Georgia, I believe, still is, I kind of agree with the odds makers, and I kind of agree with the national writer. It may be more 10-2 than 11-1 for me right now, just being honest, but that's still college football playoff. And a year ago, 10-2 got you the SEC championship, and 10-2 made a national championship conversation possible, even if you didn't quite achieve it. And that's still sort of where I am right now, with the belief that 10-2, 11-1 maybe, are very realistic possibilities for Georgia. And if that's actually the case, and I think more of you probably agree with me on that than not, if that's actually the case, then all of the other issues that we say we see with Georgia, hey, maybe a lot of those might not be quite as significant as we've treated them like they have been over the course of the last couple of months. Now, all of that said, before I wrap up this topic, if you want to hear the completely opposite viewpoint on this, Mike Griffith is going to join us today. Mike's actually going to be with us the next 3 days because just like we're doing kind of over-unders for Georgia, and we just talked about the Georgia season win total, we're actually going to do some season win total talk with him about a lot of the other SEC teams and obviously get into some of the stuff as it relates to Georgia. And if you feel like you're listening to me and I'm being too optimistic, sometimes you might say Pollyanna-ish, the phrase that we use here, the Disney dog, the Georgia fan that's just a little too happy and joyous. If you feel like that's what I'm being right now, I can promise you this. Mike is about to give you the exact opposite viewpoint. It sounds like he's got some concerns here right now, which maybe reflects your opinion overall. But either way, that's what this week's going to be about. Before it's done, we're going to try to see if we can zero in on exactly what Georgia might be in 2025. And I guess by way of spoiler alert, I'm here to tell you that I still think Georgia's going to be pretty darn good. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. So happy to have you with us here today, no matter how you get to us. Normally it's live video 10 a.m., not this week, but we still wanted to cut, at least for the beginning of the part of the week. There'll be a portion of me every day this week, but on Thursday and Friday, as a way to kind of catch up on a lot of the news that's out there, we'll have live conversation. Our friend Kaylee Mansell going to be a part of that. Connor Riley, Jeff Sintel. We may have some special guests that kind of show up as a part of that. We're going to do a lot with you over the course of this week, and a good bit of it live before the week is done. But for this week, I am also enjoying a little bit of spring break. But even if I can't be here live, I want to say a special thank you to our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia who make today's show possible. And, of course, energy-efficient windows and doors, that's what Pella Window and Door of Georgia is all about. Springtime and spring break oftentimes means spring cleaning, too, which means people want to do everything they can to take the very best possible care of their house. And so when you're thinking about upgrading your home, the window is one of the great places you can look because it impacts the way your home feels on the inside, how it looks on the outside. And we've had a chance to be out and visiting with our friends from Pella Window and Door of Georgia at the Atlanta Home Show not too long ago. A lot of you seen them at the various spring festivals that have been going on all across the metro Atlanta area as of late. And as you're out there doing that and you're enjoying all of that, one of the things you do is you get a chance to sort of put your hands on the Pella product, feel the windows, feel what makes them different, feel what makes them, frankly, better, an improvement and upgrade over what you currently have. And if you miss the chance to do that with any of the events that have been going on, you should look for them out in the community in the very near future. But also, you can stop by and see them in Duluth at their Experience Center. They got a great spot just down the road from our current studio here in Dunwoody. Just a lot of great ways for you to connect with the Pella product and really find out why the incredible new innovative technology in these windows is such a cool thing. So to find out more and to get great savings, check out PellaGA.com/DawgNation. That's PellaGA.com/DawgNation. You can also give them a call, 678-638-1429. That's 678-638-1429. Pella Window and Door of Georgia is going beyond. All right, as I mentioned before, this week, no John Stinchcomb. Some of our special normal guests will not be here. We're going to do kind of an interesting, ongoing, progressive conversation with, by progressive, I mean it's going to progress through the next 3 days, conversation with Mike Griffith today, tomorrow, and Wednesday, looking at some over-unders, some stuff as it involves Georgia here coming up in just a minute. But prior to that, let's go around the doghouse, and it's poured today by Dr. Pepper. Now, on the subject of kind of unanswered questions for Georgia, one of the things that we have certainly seen for Georgia is what looks like a bit of a star on the rise here at the safety position when it comes to KJ Bolden. Bolden is a guy we're going to talk about before this week is done. But when you think about, not easy to play Georgia as a freshman, Bolden played a good bit. It seems like he's ready to kind of take over the role that Malachi Starks has been in, that he took over from Lewisine, that Lewisine took over from, say, Richard LeCount, who maybe took that over from J.R. Reed. Tremendous lineage of safeties here at Georgia, and KJ Bolden seems like the next in line. But you're going to play with 2 safeties, and you're going to play with 5 defensive backs on the field at any given time. And while Bolden is getting pretty close to being a given, and I think there's a pretty good feeling out there about Janelle Aguero, either as a safety or maybe more likely as the nickelback, as Georgia calls it, a star, there are a lot of other guys, newcomers to the program in some cases, young guys who haven't played a lot in other cases, other safeties here for Georgia. Boy, right now it seems like they're just not quite as much of a known commodity as maybe what KJ Bolden is. So the other day, Georgia coach Kirby Smart was asked, what about the safeties other than Bolden? It's an important position, especially in the Georgia defense. Kirby Smart, because of his history as a player, obviously demands a high level of performance at the safety position. You feel like you know Bolden. You sort of think you know what you're going to get from him. What about these other guys? This is what Kirby Smart said about that.
A lot of guys, man. It's just like a lot of guys, and there's nobody really standing out. KJ's there, and he continues to bulk up, get a little bit bigger, and be able to take care of himself and tackle like he needs to in terms of size. But he understands the defense, and he's a good athlete. He can do things in cover. Jacory's working in there. Zai Branch is working in there. I mean, we got Maddox working in there. Jaden's working in there. Jacory, I think I mentioned him. Todd Robinson. Jonelle's gotten reps at safety as well as star. Jaden's working at star some. Kyron's working at star. Kyron's working at safety. I mean, it's a lot of people, but there's no the solid foundation that Malachi and Dan provided is not there. So it's a by committee group. I'm thinking it's too early to have anybody out in the lead. They're all swimming a little bit. They're trying to survive practice instead of thrive, and we want to thrive, not survive.
If you're watching on video, and if you're listening to radio podcast, this is not going to make sense to you. But look at the Georgia G on that Kirby Smart clip we just played. That thing has been through the ringer. It's almost like a NASCAR paint scheme after a wreck, or one of these players, lineman that's been kind of trading paint with the opposing player. I don't know if we can have the ability to play that clip without sound, let people see the Kirby Smart G. Look at that G, man. That thing has been flaked off. You're a physical football team when your coach is like windbreaker, when his pullover has been all scratched up to smithereens, and that one has been through it. That's a pretty tough-minded coach right there when, he's out there coaching so hard that he's sort of peeling the paint off his logo and just still going right out there after it. Our Kelly Manziel suggests that maybe he's just wearing one of those bootleg jackets. Y'all know what she's talking about. You buy that, off-brand Georgia gear, and that thing peels off in 5 seconds. I'd like to think that's not what Kirby Smart's doing, but I guess you never know on that. But the point of the clip is that there's obviously a lot of unknowns when it comes to Georgia in the safety position other than K.J. Bolden, we think we like. Sounds like Ja'Cory Thomas has been doing well lately. That's kind of exciting to think about. Let me also give you another name from that sort of defensive back room to perhaps consider here just a bit. I noticed this the other day from our friends at Pro Football Focus. It's at least worth kind of thinking about here that Adrian Maddox comes to Georgia by way of UAB. By the way, it's a sharp-looking Blazer uniform, once again, if you're watching on video. And our friends at Pro Football Focus remind us of these numbers for Maddox while with UAB. Didn't allow a single touchdown, came up with an interception, also broke up 5 passes. His passer rating allowed was 69.6, and his coverage grade was 89.5. So overall, good numbers from Pro Football Focus for Adrian Maddox. I don't know what that translates to necessarily in the SEC, but we've talked about a lot of other kind of new players, some of them transfers, other positions. Perhaps Maddox hasn't gotten enough of our attention. One of those guys, when you bring in someone from like the Group of 5 level or the FCS level, you don't necessarily know what you have. But at least according to Pro Football Focus, maybe something to consider when it comes to Adrian Maddox as a part of a battle for Georgia to figure out who its best defensive backs are and how it replaces. Not just Malachi Starks, but as Kirby Smart said, Dan Jackson too. Some real veteran presence that gave Georgia a lot of both tangible play on the field, intangible leadership off the field. Georgia trying to figure that out. So whether it's Adrian Maddox or somebody else, trying to find out who's going to stand alongside K.J. Bolden in that safety position here this fall, a very important task for UGA. And that is Around the Doghouse. It's poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. Now, many of you enjoying some great spring break time here this week. So as you're kicking back and relaxing, let me encourage you to enjoy the rich, one-of-a-kind flavor of Dr. Pepper as you do that. Whether it be the traditional flavors that we've loved from Dr. Pepper for a long time, Dr. Pepper, Diet Dr. Pepper Zero Sugar. Many of you a couple of years ago fell in love with Dr. Pepper Strawberries and Cream when it was first introduced. And now the brand new offering from Dr. Pepper Blackberry and Dr. Pepper Blackberry Zero Sugar. The point is, you're getting together with the friends here during the spring break. You're hanging out with family. You're doing fun stuff. Let Dr. Pepper go with you for all of that. So as you're at your local Kroger, wherever you're doing your grocery shopping, check out the rich, delicious, one-of-a-kind flavor of Dr. Pepper. Because when it comes to Dr. Pepper and DawgNation Daily, it's a pepper thing. We're glad to have them as a part of Around the Doghouse here today. So, as I told you, no John Stinchcomb today. Fun stuff with Mike Griffith. Mike takes a very different take on Georgia than the one I expressed a little earlier. We'll also get into some of the other big teams in the SEC. The teams alongside Georgia projected for the most wins here this season. How well do we think they'll do? We'll talk about that and everything else with Mike Griffith here right now on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So our theme this week is kind of around the idea of over-unders, some of those for Georgia, a lot of those the rest of the SEC. And anytime we do stuff like this, Mike Griffith, always a great resource for that. Mike, I know you've got a lot to say about both Georgia and the other teams in the SEC. So, thank you for spending this time with me, kind of a little bit different than our normal schedule. I know people will love to hear from you on this. If you don't mind, I want to kind of jump right into it. We're looking at the over-under win totals as published by FanDuel, one of the the bigger sports books that's out there. And I want to start right there at the top when it comes to Georgia. Last year with the difficulty of the UGA schedule, 10-2 felt like a pretty good year, just given all the landmines. Well, this year it's I think on paper, a pretty difficult schedule as well. And once again, I think 10-2 from a regular season standpoint would be pretty successful. With that in mind, do you think that Georgia can and will win 10 regular season games again?
Well, this is this is the trick of it, right? So if we're looking at the team right now, pre-GD, pre-portal, no. I think Georgia needs work. I think Kirby's got to acquire some players in the portal before the summer to get Georgia over that mark. And it's right there, Brandon. It's, you think about last year, and you mentioned 10-2. There were 3 games that could have gone either way: Kentucky, Alabama, Georgia Tech. And the Dogs won 2 of those 3 games. That was with an NFL talent at quarterback. That was with 3 first-round players on defense. When I look at the quarterback situation now, and I look at the front 7, I don't see 3 first-rounders in the front 7. I don't know if I see 1 first-round pick in the front 7. And at quarterback, as much as I like Gunnar Stockton and certainly would want him to babysit my kids, I'm not sure he's an elite talent that can put a team on his shoulders. Now, if you surrounded Gunnar Stockton with Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers, James Cook, Kenny McIntosh, gave him a first-round left tackle at Broderick Jones, gave him outstanding offensive line play, I'd tell you he could probably win a national championship. But that's not what he has to work with right now. There's a lot of questions on the perimeter. There's not a lot of depth in the backfield. I like Nate Frazier, but who else? Cash Jones is an effective weapon. The offensive line's shaky. It's hard to imagine from a talent standpoint them equaling last year. And yet last year's offensive line took a step back. The tight end play, well, it wasn't what we thought it would be. There's reasons for optimism, but they haven't done it yet. And while the schedule does get easier, certainly from a non-conference standpoint, you still have some very difficult opponents, albeit at home instead of on the road. So right now, no. Right now, I think it's a 3-loss Georgia team in the regular season. But I'm not counting Kirby out. I don't think he's done, Brandon. I think he put everyone on notice at the beginning of the spring. He said the players weren't meeting the standard. And he said if the players didn't meet the standard, that he would go out and get players that would. And that was more than a hint to me.
So, Mike, taking the under for Georgia here in 2025, 9.5 at FanDuel. How about when you look at the competition for Georgia? The other team, one of the other teams at 9.5 right now is Texas. Do you view Texas as still Georgia's stiffest competition in the SEC? You can certainly make the case that was true a year ago, the 2 teams that played for the conference championship.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, that's what made last season so special and you know, one of the best coaching jobs I've ever seen. And I know there's been a lot of questions about coaching, but I don't think we'd second guess much about the efforts against Texas. And to me, that was the team to beat, and that was the team Georgia beat twice. And in spite of the fact that the Longhorns were incredibly talented, I think Texas is going to be better. Now, the thing about the Texas over-under that's different is they play at Ohio State in their opener. Yeah. I don't necessarily want to call that a win. I'm not going to call it a loss, but that's at the very best, it's 50-50 for Texas. Can they win at Florida? I think Florida's going to be a surprise team. Not really for the Gator fans that watch DJ Lagway, or even the Georgia fans that saw Florida beating Georgia until DJ Lag went out of the game. I still think Texas wins at Florida. I think Oklahoma's much improved, but I think Texas wins that game too. Texas at Georgia, I'm going to give the Dogs that win. That's a little bit of a surprise after what I just said, I know. I'm going to take the over, though, because I think that Texas will not lose more than 2 games in the regular season, even if they lose at Georgia, which I expect, even if they lose to Ohio State. To me, that'll be their only 2 losses in the regular season right now, if I had to guess.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the Longhorns, certainly by any stretch of the imagination, but I think one of the things that Steve Sarkisian has successfully put to bed is the idea that Texas is sort of an underachieving program. You know, the old meme about Texas is back and everybody always laughing about that. Well, the truth is there's only one team that's been in the Final Four the last 2 years in each of the last 2 seasons, and that's Texas. That I think recruiting success, you know, kind of what they think is going to be a successful transition at quarterback. They obviously believe in Arch Manning. You know, I think Sarkisian looks like a real coach. I think this looks like a real program in a way that for like sustained back-to-back years, I don't know that Texas has ever been in my lifetime, that they found a level of consistency under Sarkisian right now that they've just not really had much in the past.
I'm going to say this, and I'm not trying to be controversial or overly provocative, Brandon, but if Georgia wins the recruiting battle for Arch Manning, I'm taking the over for Georgia, and I'm saying they're slam dunk to win the SEC. I think quarterback makes that big of a difference. I think Arch Manning is that much of a talent. I think he's incredible. I think the way he can run the ball, I think the way he can throw the ball, I think his pedigree, I think his football knowledge, I think this guy is an amazing football player. And I think the trend that you're going to see with me and my predictions, and I guess we'll see how this works out, is the programs with the great quarterbacks are more likely to go over. Ultimately, it comes down to that guy under center. And now Arch went into the game against Georgia late in the second quarter, moved the ball a little bit, and then he got racked pretty good. That inexperience caught up with him, as did the Georgia front 7. They were all over any quarterback in that stadium that night. One of the most impressive Georgia football games I've seen, Kirby Smart coach. But I think he's going to be better, more experienced. Meanwhile, you look at Georgia and Gunnar Stockton, and everybody says, well, you know, He got in there and he did say, guys, he scored 10 points against Notre Dame. End of the day. Now, I know there was a fumble on the opening possession, but other than that, you scored 10 points against Notre Dame with Gunnar Stockton. So when you say that the players like him and respond to him, maybe in the locker room, but did they really respond in that game? Now, that's a very small sample size and maybe not fair, but I didn't see Gunnar Stockton do enough with his mobility to make me think that he can be a difference maker with his feet, like Stetson Bennett was. And I didn't see him do enough with his arm to make me think that Georgia's going to be throwing the ball 35 or 40 times. In fact, Kirby Smart said they're going to work on the run game more. They're going to try to get more balance. They're going to try and set up play action. Say what you want about Carson Beck, and we have said plenty, but that guy could throw the football. Now, his receivers didn't always catch it, and I do think Gunnar maybe will have more consistency in the receiving core, dare say. Can't imagine it be any worse. But when you line the quarterbacks up, if you were to trade those quarterbacks and give Georgia Arch Manning and Texas Gunnar Stockton, I would reverse my predictions. But I think Arch Manning is the key to that Texas team, and he's why I think that Texas will be playing in the SEC championship game again.
Let me squeeze in one final one for today. That's Alabama. It kind of feels like the true Kalen DeBoer era begins now, a year after Nick Saban's departure. He's got to find his own quarterback now. He's got his own offensive coordinator in place. They also have a very high win total, too. They're also kind of in that 9.5 range for a team that lost 3 times a year ago. To put them in the same category of the Georgias and the Texas and the other teams, Tennessee, is that too much in the way of expectations for Alabama right now? Because for the first time in a long time, we really have no idea who the Alabama starting quarterback is going to be.
Yeah, fair point. And I would have, not to second guess you, BA, but if we're talking first tier teams here, I'd be talking about LSU right now. I know we'll probably get to that later in the week, but I said last spring, and I took a lot of heat, especially after Alabama beat Georgia in that inexplicable first half. Talk about an outlier. I don't think we'll ever see a Georgia first half like that again under Kirby Smart. But fact of the matter is, they were a second-tier team. They did not make the college football playoff. The first tier last year were the 3 SEC teams that made the playoff: Georgia, Tennessee, Texas. Second tier dropped down to the non-playoff teams right on the verge: South Carolina, Alabama, and Ole Miss. I think Alabama stays in the second tier. Now, I know that Kalen DeBoer has Ryan Grubb back. I had a chance to talk with the AD, Greg Byrne, when I was out at Wichita at that regional, and he's optimistic. He feels like the culture is shifting into what Kalen DeBoer wants. It's hard to do that in 1 year. We saw Kirby Smart have his struggles in his first year at Georgia. Difference is, I don't think Alabama has the sort of talent that Georgia did in 2017. I think they're still very talented. I think they're still very good, but the Tide has lost its edge. There's no other explanation for the way they went on the road and faltered at Oklahoma. We talk about Georgia having an un-Georgia-like performance at Ole Miss, and 28-10 looked pretty bad, but it didn't look as bad as Alabama losing at Oklahoma. I don't know that the Tide gets back into the SEC championship game next year, and I don't know that they make the playoff. Even with Ryan Grubb, the offensive coordinator, back, I don't think that's a fix-all. I mean, I think way too much sometimes gets put on offensive coordinators, Georgia included. You call the plays you want, but if guys are dropping the ball and linemen aren't doing their blocking assignments, it doesn't matter what the play call is. So I'm going to say below for Alabama as well, even though their schedule doesn't really scare me as much. I will say they have to play at South Carolina. And I think Shane Beamer, he's only the second South Carolina coach ever, I believe, Brandon. You can check me on this. Second South Carolina coach ever, joining Steve Spurrier with a 9-win regular season, if I'm not mistaken. I think South Carolina is going to be very good at the line of scrimmage. I'm a big believer in Lenora Sellers. I look at that Alabama schedule. They have to play at Georgia. I'm going to count that as a Georgia win. They also have to play at Missouri. Remember, Missouri's quarterback, Brady Cook, got hurt in that game last year. Not saying it's necessarily a loss, 50-50 game, however. They have to play Tennessee. Tennessee's had success against them recently. And then they have to play LSU, the other team I expect to be in the SEC championship game. And we'll see what happens with Auburn at the end of the year. They're going to have to play on the Plains this season.
Mike, good stuff. If you don't mind, we'll come back and do some more tomorrow. Thanks for being with us here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
Look forward to it, Brandon. Thanks.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Really good stuff with Mike Griffith. We appreciate him being a part of our shows this week. Kind of going with that over-under theme. Speaking of that, we're going to keep that going here as far as we get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And boy, so excited. DawgNation Cruise right around the corner here. A lot of folks getting ready to be on Utopia of the Seas for that, and you already know. My encouragement to you is to also be on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation here sometime in 2025. Just when the weather starts getting warm, it's spring break week, people are enjoying this kind of stuff. It's time for you to kind of get excited about your own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. I tell you, there's a lot to consider when it comes to this. That's why I would advise you to use a great travel agent like Jessica Slater to make your Royal Caribbean cruise vacation even better. That's Royal Caribbean's belief that a great Royal Caribbean cruise vacation made even better when you use a wonderful travel agent like Jessica Slater to help you plan it. So give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. One more time on that email address, jslater@dreamvacations.com, if you want to learn more about Utopia of the Seas, the debut of Star of the Seas later on this summer, the debut of the Royal Beach Club at Paradise Islands in Nassau in the Bahamas coming up before the end of the year. Jessica can tell you about all of that. So make sure you check her out today. Now, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC here, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And with kind of the over-under theme for the week, over the course of the next 3 days, and by the way, we got great stuff coming up on Thursday and Friday, but for me in this space, the next 3 days, I'm going to give you one over and one under that I like for each of the 3 days. And this is sort of early thoughts, and there's probably more I could say. I'm going to pick one over and one under for each day for the next 3 days. I'm going to start with an over for right now. And if you've been listening to me over the course of the last couple of months, this may not be a huge surprise. But an over I like, a win total for the upcoming season. I'm going to take Auburn over 7.5. This number coming to us courtesy of FanDuel. Now, I do realize that there's a lot of what you call steam. There are a lot of people who seem to like Auburn right now. And oftentimes, the public is just not that right about any given thing. So always going to be a little nervous when you're kind of joining the masses in a situation like this. Very crowded streets right now when it comes to Auburn and the chance for improvement. Let me give you a couple of reasons why, though, in this particular case, why I don't think that's necessarily wrong. First of all, as a coach, Hugh Freeze has been a winner. He won at Liberty, not necessarily an easy thing to do, even though it was Conference USA schedule. Went to 2 New Year's Six Bowls at Ole Miss, as you know, the crowning achievement of his professional career, beating Nick Saban and Alabama twice. And that kind of becomes a little bit of a punchline because people like me reference it so much, but it still happened, and it's still part of, I think, the overall story. This is an offensive, innovative mind, and good offensive play has been a part of his success at previous stops in his coaching career. Here's why we think there's more chance of that happening for Auburn right now than perhaps times in the past. First of all, one of the places where Auburn has seemingly had recruiting success is at the wide receiver position. They have a crop of, at least 4 very good young wide receivers. The name you perhaps know the most there is Cam Coleman. When you think about Ohio State being led by Jeremiah Smith, when you think about Alabama being led by Ryan Williams, as a player, as a talent, I don't know that Coleman is wildly below the standard of those other 2 guys, as good as they are. I think that Coleman has some chance to kind of be mentioned, at least in the same breath. So if you're looking for better offensive play, a receiver like Coleman, one of the ways you might get it. Also, keep in mind, when you think about one of the bigger free agent acquisitions of this past offseason, the former Georgia Tech wide receiver Eric Singleton landing in Auburn, that was a pretty big deal. And I think that Auburn has a chance to be better at quarterback. A year ago, I think they knew they weren't very good at quarterback, but they didn't really want to spend the money on a team they didn't think was necessarily worth it. Well, this year it's kind of, if you want to call last year sort of like the college sports version of when the pro sports teams tank, well, this is the year that Auburn, maybe not quite all in, but certainly heavily expecting to be improved, to get the 8th, to perhaps get the 9th win. If you're in that 9-win category, all of a sudden now you're within shouting distance of maybe even competing for a college football playoff spot. I don't know that I'm getting that far with Auburn, but I like them over 7.5. You think about the schedule, keep in mind a year ago, this is a team that lost to Cal in non-conference play. This year they have to play at Baylor. Baylor was supposed to be one of the worst teams in America last year, at least in the Power 5, Power 4 conferences. But Baylor, they're actually okay. So tricky game for them. If you're looking for that 8th or 9th win, you need that non-conference, game to give it to you. Baylor won't be a pushover. Keep that in mind. I'll also take the under 6.5 when it comes to Oklahoma. A lot of what we've seen in college football this offseason, a little bit of a trend. You've heard about GMs being hired, general managers. One of the things we've also seen in some cases, general managers are being hired without necessarily a whole lot of input from the head coach. I would suggest that for Brent Venables in Oklahoma, the hire of Jim Nagy there, as formerly of the Senior Bowl, as their new general manager, is a bit of an example of, you've put an infrastructure in place that's perhaps designed to outlive and outlast your current head coach. Now, all of the hopes for improvement for Oklahoma kind of being pinned on Venables is obviously a very good defensive mind, long-time success as the defensive coordinator at Clemson. But they're going to try to majorly upgrade their offense here this year by bringing in Ben Arbuckle, the former offensive coordinator at Washington State, and his quarterback, John Mateer. Now, we've seen Wazoo quarterbacks transfer and have great success. The rumor mill is crazy about how much money Oklahoma has paid Mateer to come there. Obviously, Mateer had a lot of options, and maybe that's a good thing for the Sooners. It also sort of reeks of desperation of we're trying to do anything we can to be good enough to keep our job. And sometimes that desperation kind of comes from the fact that, if you must win this recruiting battle to bring in a guy like this in, then you must not be very good. And I suspect, especially compared to the schedule, Oklahoma might not be very good. It's a game against LSU. We've got to be at Alabama, at Tennessee, Ole Miss, at South Carolina. Got to play Michigan out of the conference. That's a pretty tough schedule for a team desperate for wins. I like the under 6.5 when it comes to Oklahoma, and I believe this will probably end up being Brent Venables' last year in Norman and perhaps in the SEC. And for now, we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And, of course, since I'm not here live this week, we'll take a break on our golden shoes, get back to those when I return next week. Hope you're all, if you're enjoying a spring break week, having a good time with it. Lousy, stinking Gators, they are not having very much fun right now. How about 1,610 days? I always like the nice round numbers, the end with zero. They always look nice on the screen. How about 1,610 days? That's how long it's been since Florida has beaten Georgia. As we do kind of our over-under stuff, I don't know that we'll get to Florida for us on our SEC through. I believe our buddy Mike Griffith may have something to say about the Gators before the week is done. Clearly a team in desperate need of some improvement. We'll see if this year they're able to provide that. Long time since they've beaten Georgia. We don't see that changing here this fall. Hey, we appreciate you being here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. When I'm not here live, we still work trying to make the shows as fun and enjoyable as we possibly can. Hopefully we did right by you today. We got plenty more on tap for tomorrow, so we'll see you then. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews is the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that is promised. I want to say to all of you who are enjoying each other's company right now, or arguing with each other more likely, love the interaction, love the back and forth. Wish I was here to participate with it with you. Don't forget, we've got pre-recorded shows today, obviously, and then tomorrow and Wednesday. I'll have a portion of the Thursday and Friday show, but we've also got some really fun stuff lined up to do with you live on Thursday and Friday. One of the things we've tried to do, kind of really responding to your feedback on that, was you had said, hey, we need more live stuff. We want to have, if BA can't be here, we'd like the chance to interact. We'd like the chance to do some stuff. So Thursday and Friday this week, we've got some special programming coming your way. We'll give you a chance to enjoy that. Then 1 week from today, I'm right back here in the seat again, getting ready to do all of this with you. So that's good stuff. We'll see you then for that and back here tomorrow. Also, don't forget, the R.S. Andrews Cool Down is brought to you by our friends at R.S. Andrews. And the R.S. stands for rapid service. That means if you've got a plumbing emergency, such as your water heater going out, well, our friends at R.S. Andrews, in many cases, can replace that for you the same day. So make sure you find them online at rsandrews.com for a lot more on that. Look forward to seeing you back here tomorrow. Thanks for being with us for R.S. Andrews Cool Down at the end of the show, and DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia before that, starting at 10 a.m. We'll see you.